you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with the City of Lebanon to learn more about your continued efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic and to hear firsthand about how funds from the American Rescue Plan passed by Congress are impacting and strengthening your community. I'm so pleased to join my friend and former classmate, Mayor Timothy McNamara, and City Manager Sean Mulholland in announcing the City of Lebanon's project to extend broadband communication to the remaining 142 homes in the City of Lebanon that currently do not have internet service. The American Rescue Plan is the most consequential legislation that I have voted for during my time in Congress. And because of it, the City of Lebanon has been able to assist businesses, invest in regional childcare, and seriously dedicate resources to water, sewer, and broadband expansion. The COVID-19 pandemic has underscored the need for greater investment in broadband here in New Hampshire and all across the country, particularly in our rural communities. As a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee and a member of the House Rural Broadband Task Force, I have been on the front lines ensuring that rural communities are not left behind. We also must focus on moving our economy forward. Lebanon's regional child care initiative goes hand in hand with our economic recovery by ensuring that our state's workforce, our hardworking families, and our young children have high quality childcare that they deserve so that moms and dads and caretakers can return to their jobs. I'm really looking forward to seeing the impact of these projects in the years to come. And I want to thank you again for taking time today to be with us. I'm eager to hear more from you. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Mayor McNamara to kick things off.
Thanks very much, Annie. So just to put things in perspective a little bit, as you mentioned, at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, we had 142 homes, residences in Lebanon, largely in rural areas, that were not served by high-speed broadband. Now, we were actually quite fortunate. That represents somewhere between 3 and 4% of our total residences. So most of our residents did have this service, but this was a real issue for those that didn't. We had comments, from parents who were trying to get their kids to log on to keep up with their schoolwork, and they really had some struggles. So we're happy to be on the road to having that resolved. After some discussions, we were able to enter into a partnership with Comcast to connect these 142 homes all the way to the building itself. In other words, including the long drops, what they call the long drops, because some of these houses are on fairly long private driveways. So we're going to go all the way to the house. The total project cost is about $595,000. We're leveraging $60,000 in ARPA funds to help it happen. So it was truly a public-private partnership. And the intent is that by the end of December and this coming year, 2022, all 142 of those homes will be hooked up. That will give us 100% coverage in the city of Lebanon and will allow us to have really equitable opportunities for all our residents for both remote learning, telehealth, and remote working. So we're very pleased to be on this road, to have this happen, and we really appreciate the help from ARPA.
Super. And anyone else want to make a few comments from your team?
So I'll have Sarah Jackson from Vital Communities talk about the child care initiative that we put together with many other partners and how we're leveraging ARPA funds with other funds from the private sector to deal with this issue. And also Amy Brooks from the Early Childhood Education Association. And after that, I'll have Tracy Hutchins from the Upper Valley Business Alliance talk about the ARPA funds the city used to help out the local businesses here. So we'll start out with Sarah.
Great, thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean, and great to be with you, Congressman Kuster. We are very excited about this opportunity, which is a public-private partnership. Vital Communities works in a number of sectors in housing, transportation, farming, energy, climate, and so on. And we work closely with municipal leaders and with corporate leaders, as well as nonprofit organizations and advocacy organizations in all of the work we do. And last summer, a number of those groups asked if we could conduct a symposium to look at the childcare crisis in our region, because as you know, it's so critical to the well-being of our families, to their ability to work, and for our employers to be able to hire people. So we reached out to a number of organizations in the community. Sean was part of our municipal leaders group along with Mayor McNamara. Sean agreed to join. We had a couple of people from the Couch Family Foundation, Amy Brooks from the Early Care and Education Association of the Upper Valley, and people from the Corporate Council as well as other economic development groups, and had a great response to a two-part symposium in November, looking at both the ways in which the childcare crisis is playing out, and then who's doing what, and how can we bring all of these voices to the table to really tackle this issue and come up with solutions. And that was when Sean said that they would have ARPA money potentially available to support us as we move forward beyond the symposium, to coordinate work groups. And we then were able to secure funding from the Couch Family Foundation, and more recently from a private donor. So this really is a great partnership. And our work groups started this month, and they've all got 90-day sprint plans to tackle various challenges related to childcare. And we're very excited about the ARPA funds and your support for childcare in the region. So thank you.
Well, and I have supported, and the House has already voted for additional funding, because this childcare problem is playing out all across the country, but particularly across New Hampshire in rural communities. And for me, I feel as though COVID really pulled back the curtain on a lot of the underlying inequalities and challenges within our economy. And if you think about it, in my generation as a working parent, childcare was a personal problem. It wasn't anything that you expected somebody else to solve. And I can remember my husband and I trying to piece this together with our two boys who are now 30 and 33. And it's astonishing to me that 30 years later, I have 8 nieces. 6 of them have been home raising kids during COVID and working, and total chaos. And nothing has changed. Nothing is better. There's no better supports. And we watched as our fragile childcare infrastructure either struggled to keep up in March of 2020 as we closed down, or just plain closed their doors. And now we have an opportunity to, as we say, build back better, to try to, let's think about this. And I love the approach you're taking. Let's bring everybody in the community, and particularly that the employers have a seat at the table, because we've demonstrated this is not a personal problem. This is an economic problem. It's a problem for your community. It's a problem for your municipality. Nobody is immune from this problem. And part of the thing that I remember was when we were solving it individually, it was only the people with young children were engaged in it. And if you didn't have young children, or as soon as your children were in school, you were no longer engaged in it. And I think what we need to recognize, it is a different kind of infrastructure, but just the way you need roads and bridges and highways to get to work and get your goods to market, you need broadband and childcare to get to work and get your goods to market. And I think it's a societal issue. It's with us forever in terms of parents working and wanting to raise a healthy, thriving generation for our communities, for our society, and for our economy. And that's the bottom line. And so I hope we come out of this stronger than ever. I want to honor Dick and Barbara Couch and their wonderful family foundation. Their Hypertherm is an extraordinary employer within the community in the Upper Valley and within our state. They're a national role model in terms of how a family business can approach their role in society. And I'm just so proud of them for stepping up for that. And all of, good on you, Sean Mulholland, for the town to step up, and Tim McNamara for the city of Lebanon to step up and just say, we own this. This is on us. We also recognize the role of the public schools. And I think that's another thing that I don't think most of us were thinking about it every day, that people can't go to work without their children being well cared for and fed and educated. And so childcare is no different. It starts at a very young age. Families need to work. Most families in New Hampshire need 2 incomes. We're well past the days of assuming that someone can stay home and take care of the family and it's going to thrive on 1 income. And we've all got to step up. So thank you, Sarah, for your leadership. Amy, I'd love to hear your role in it and what the future holds for us with childcare.
Thank you. It's incredible that we are having this meeting and we're actually talking about childcare as part of the economic stability of our region. So thank you very much for bringing us together. I guess I can elaborate on what the work that we're doing. We after the symposium, we ended up forming the steering committee, formed 3 working groups. Advocacy, around facilities and program models, and also around the staffing.
Yes.
Staffing, which is the, kind of that kingpin of the situation right now. And surprisingly and wonderfully, they're fairly well attended. We are having work groups that are in the way double digits.
Excellent.
And, we're not getting, we still have some people that we're searching for to kind of round out what those work groups represent, but we have parents, we have employers, we have people with some expertise. I am the leader right now of the staffing, recruitment, and retention work group. And on our work group, we have HR from some of our local businesses. So, just having those kinds of people at the table is just something that's never happened, never been thought that could happen. And I guess for the future, this group, I feel like is getting that kind of momentum that we could actually come up with some really incredible and innovative solutions. There's a lot of work that needs to be done that's long-term, but at the same time, there are some things that community-based groups can actually get going and get moving on now in a short-term way. So we appreciate the support of the ARPA as we move forward, and hopefully we will see some recovery in childcare in the next 6 months as we start to work on the pipeline.
Yeah.
Staffing back into centers so centers can start fully enrolling and getting people back to work.
And that's the conundrum. It's interesting. My team and I were just having a conversation about, the legislation that we're going to be working on coming out of COVID and where we're headed. And childcare was high on the list, as was broadband, making sure that everybody has access. And what's interesting about childcare is that with this workforce issue, it's also right at the crux of the conundrum that we face which is we're watching it all across the state right now, all across the country. So at the height of the shutdown, New Hampshire reached 16% unemployment. The astonishing thing for me is that 84% of the people kept working every single day and never missed a day of work throughout COVID. So that's pretty astonishing. Frontline healthcare workers and people like us working like this. But now we've already come down to 2.6% unemployment in the state. And what that's doing is that it's very difficult to find people, and it's also driving wages. And childcare is right at that crux where the price point is so sensitive, and it's just a catch-22. People can't go back to work. I mean, the 2.6 unemployment, it doesn't reflect all the people that are still out of the workforce. And part of that is they're still fearful for their safety. But as the Omicron numbers come down, as people are vaccinated and boosted and staying safe, hopefully people can get back into the workplace, but then they don't have a safe, healthy place for their children. So then you look at those childcare workers, and they need a safe, healthy place for their children if they're young, working families, or they need better wages to have a livable wage that they can make do and get by. And I think part of what's happening in this transition is a recognition across the board that wages in low income jobs were insufficient for people to live a living wage. They could not afford housing in the Upper Valley. They couldn't afford to keep a car going. They couldn't afford snow tires and car repairs. And low income people really struggled to get by, and oftentimes working 2 or 3 different positions. And most people didn't recognize that until COVID. We didn't completely understand how much people were struggling. And childcare workers were right in that group. It's very hard to find a childcare position where you were going to be paid sufficiently, where you were going to have benefits like childcare or paid days off or paid leave or vacations. And I think what's happening is that people have different opportunities now. They have higher paid positions, fast food restaurants, $14, $15, $16 an hour, to say nothing of manufacturing. And then you look at jobs that are what we would think of as more white collar jobs. Fidelity in New Hampshire is booming, 900 new positions in Merrimack, New Hampshire. BAE, another big company in the southern tier, 800 or 900 new positions. So companies want to hire people here in New Hampshire. We work hard and we put in a good day's work and we're committed to it. But right now, at those lower paid positions, it's very, very hard. So this moment in childcare is going to be, I think, particularly challenging. And again, back to, as a society, we have to value it more. Employers that have come to the table, those HR people are at the table with you because they're having a hard time hiring people, and they want to pull people back into the workforce who have young families, who have children. So it's all happening at once, and you're right at the center of it, Amy. But I want to support you, and I really, really hope that we can get the legislation that the House passed. It's a part of this Build Back Better. And if we don't get the whole thing done in the Senate, I hope at least this childcare piece will get done, where there will be funding available to community groups like yours to address the facilities issue and the workforce issue. And let's treat the job of caring for our children with the same respect and compensation that we think of for teachers generally. And, one approach that has been talked about is bringing childcare, at least for 3 and 4-year-olds, into the public school system, because then you cut in half the number of young children that you need to educate in the private system, but also you start to have wages and benefits that the workforce, would lift that whole workforce up. And that's one of the approaches that's being talked about. In France, they do that. They have what they call crèche, a system for young babies, essentially, and then 1 and 2-year-olds. And then they go into the public school system at a younger age. I know in New Hampshire, it was only just recently that we got universal kindergarten. So this is the idea of universal pre-K is maybe, there aren't a lot of communities that have it, but in Washington, DC, they have universal pre-K, and children go to the public schools, I think, starting at age 3, and 3, 4, and 5-year-olds are in the public schools. Anyway, Sean, back to you. I'll stop talking. We'll get to Tracy.
Yeah, so the city partnership with the UVBA, the Upper Valley Business Alliance, which is our chamber of commerce that covers the city of Lebanon, the town of Hanover, and other businesses in some of the surrounding communities. For us, it was important to have this relationship and to use the ARPA funds to help businesses, and to do that with UVBA. We don't have our own organic staff to do that function. It didn't make sense to hire them. It made more sense to partner with the UVBA to do that, and that has worked out quite well. And I'll let Tracy talk about some of the things we've done with ARPA funds through UVBA.
Hello, Congresswoman. Thank you. It's nice to see you again. And this is a great conversation, and I'm so glad we're highlighting both broadband and childcare, because that's 2 of the biggest issues that I've been hearing from our businesses as well. So it's great to have that in the forefront. As Sean said, we have been partnering with the city, and over the last year, we used the ARPA funds to do a number of workforce issues, as well as support local businesses. So of course, as you know, we've talked before, but we started off doing a lot of messaging and reaching out to the local businesses to make sure that they were aware of all of the different programs that were available to them, so that they could stay in business during COVID and make it through to the other end, which I think in our region, quite a few did quite well. We did not have as many closures as I think some other parts of the country did. And many of our businesses now are doing quite well. One of the things that we did do is we launched an app last summer. And this was really to direct workforce. The Upper Valley it's a great place to live and work and to raise a family. But many of our businesses find when they hire from outside the region, we have some challenges in retaining those workers. And the reasons are many. We are a little bit more rural than some other parts of the state.
Don't tell them it's so cold.
Well, some of those who relocated from warm climates are rethinking that today, I'm sure. But, just retention is an issue. And one of the things we hear from our larger employers is just trying to keep those people. It's so important to connect them to the communities and connect them to others, and to try to, just give them resources. And so we launched our local Upper Valley app. It has a very comprehensive events calendar. It has suggestions for things to do and where to go to eat and where to find services. And, and even though that information is on our website and many other organizations' websites, when you put it on an app, it's ubiquitous. It's on everybody's cell phones. So we have had really great feedback with that. And we continue to partner with the city of Lebanon to message that out and encourage our employers to tell their employees about it as a retention tool. we've worked a lot on different workforce programs in partnership with the city, getting information out to businesses, finding ways to connect employers and employees, and continue to do so. And then also to help the city in terms of building their own economic development infrastructure, looking at the Lebanon airport, some of the parcels that the city has up there that are ready for new development. And so it's been a great partnership, and we look forward to continuing.
Well, that's great. And I visited some of the companies up by the airport, and it's really impressive. I'm just thinking the variety that you have there. We bought our wood stove up there next to the airport, but you also have the cutting edge biotech and pharmaceutical, and so I mean, the range of companies and products, and obviously Hypertherm, just I've mentioned that before, but such an extraordinary, quite literally cutting edge company, but also just as an employer in terms of the supports that they offer. And I think, again, back to coming out of COVID, what you can do for creating community and people feeling community. I think a lot of the people that have moved to New Hampshire during COVID, the quality of life that we have, the fact that you don't spend typically an hour a day each way in the car just trying to get to your job. The fact that we have so much available to us in the out of doors that they might not have had where they were before. But I think it's great in terms of getting the information to people so they know, where to go, where to show up, and that you can rent the equipment when you get there, and that you can learn, take lessons, and skiing and skating and snowmobiling and just so many things to enjoy the winter that really make you feel better. And it's a great way to get out with family and with kids. I keep noticing that even during COVID, that when you see families get out in an intergenerational way, they're having a great deal of fun that they might not have had going their own separate ways, watching their own separate television shows or being on their own separate screens. And I think it's something that we should be thinking about as a selling point for New Hampshire, the quality of life and the family involvement and the family engagement that you can have. So good for you. I'll have to check out the app. It sounds like a great tool, and one that we could share with other communities as well.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
It's called Local Upper Valley.
Okay, great. Thank you. Whoops, sorry. Anything else that you want to add before we open it up to our guests from the media?
Of the
Questions?
funds that we received in ARPA funds, the city received $1,430,000 in ARPA funds, most of which will be used for infrastructure projects. Just over $1 million will be used for water and sewer and some roadway work in the city. The rest of the programs we just talked about.
Great, great. And I know you always, we've done some good federal funding projects on roads and bridges and highways with you before, and even on broadband, Tim. I remember when we were up talking about broadband before. So, and I think you've got some sewer and water projects, and we'll continue that. That's my role. I've said this since I first went to Congress. Make sure that you all get at least $1 back for every federal tax dollar that goes down there. And I think we just need to be on top of it. I think you all have done a great job with it. And I just met this week the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development new director. And that's a program I've talked with you all about. That's a really good one for that's something we might think about. My team could help in terms of childcare grant funding, or like launching things, getting things off the ground. Also, the Northern Borders Regional Commission, we increased that funding. I think we're up to $30 million per year for its Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and upstate New York. But that's, several $1,000,000 and a good grant to about childcare there would be good. So I'll have Aaron Cotton on my team is with us on this call, and Nick Brown is our district director, and I'll make sure that I can see Sarah writing this all down. I'll make sure that we reach out and try to help you identify some other sources of federal funding, even beyond ARPA as well. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Annie Lentz on my team, who's behind the scenes here. And Annie is going to call out the members of the media that have questions.
Awesome. And like we said at the top, if anybody wants to ask a question, you can just raise your hand and we will allow you to unmute. First up is going to be Adam Sullivan from WCAX.
Hey, Adam, welcome.
And Adam, you just have to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, can you hear me, Congresswoman?
I can.
Hi, thanks. Sorry. Thanks for making time for me. I apologize. I jumped on the meeting a bit late, but it's my understanding the city of Lebanon is receiving approximately 1.4 million in ARPA funds. I'm just wondering how much of that money has been distributed, and is there any sort of not necessarily, I don't think strings attached is the right words, but is there any guidance on the federal level of how specific communities like Lebanon can use that money, or is it really just done at their discretion? And then a quick question for the mayor after the Congresswoman is done. Mayor, I apologize, I missed sort of the broadband element of the discussion, but I guess from my perspective, or my question to you is how important is it that the city of Lebanon as a whole becomes 100% connected on broadband? It's my understanding you said this project will connect the city 100%. So Congresswoman, a little bit about the process, and then Mayor, a little bit about the importance of broadband.
Sure, and I'm going to actually hand it off to Sean Mulholland, who's been working directly with the program. But the intention was to let communities decide the needs. This is about the American Rescue Plan. It's about how to make sure that our communities were not just surviving COVID, getting through, but literally rebuilding our communities as we got through the worst of the pandemic. And now that we can see the light and we can see where we're headed post-pandemic, we want to make sure that our communities come out strong and thriving. So Sean, I'll hand it off to you.
Fortunately, when Congress passed the ARPA funds, they did something which they have not traditionally done in the past. They allowed the money to go directly to towns and cities and not through the state. That reduced a lot of the difficulties, I should say, with being able to use the funds and the restrictions on the funds. And we get the funds right away. We've already received half of those funds. We'll receive the next tranche of funds in April. And we've been given broad authority to be able to use those funds, and the guidance has been very good, and it's been refined over the last few months and last year to allow us to have that flexibility to deal with the problems we have at the local level here and be able to fit those for the needs that we have. So it's been, normally we chase the money. In this case, we don't have to do that. We're allowed that flexibility, and it's worked very well to allow us to deal with the top priorities of the city that have impacted the city by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and Adam, just we can give you this language from the legislation, but it really was very flexible and very wide open. And Sean makes a really good point. We realized that time was of the essence, and I worked with my colleagues to make sure that it did go directly to the cities and towns, because New Hampshire's an unusual situation with the executive council, but we were in a position where they were picking and choosing and turning down funding, and I wanted to get the funding directly out to municipalities. But it was so broad. Let me just give you a sampling. support public health expenditures, COVID mitigation efforts, medical expenses, behavioral health care, public health and safety, address negative economic impacts caused by the public health emergency, replace lost public sector revenue. This was a big issue we were very concerned about in the beginning. We thought people wouldn't be able to pay their property taxes. In the end, because of the Paycheck Protection Program and that we kept the economy going quite strong. So that has not been the leading the leading problem, but it's one that we were aware of to make sure that governments could continue services even if their revenues were less, to provide premium pay for essential workers, offering additional support for those that bear the greatest health risks. So our frontline workers and our critical infrastructure. In the beginning, we were scrambling to support our public safety workers as they were out with COVID, and then trying to, make sure that they could stay safe. And then invest in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, improvements and access to clean drinking water, support vital wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, and expand access to broadband. So it was very, very broad. And again, let me just reiterate where we were in Congress in March of 2020. We were trying to fend off a total economic collapse in the face of a highly contagious worldwide pandemic. And I think that needs to be reiterated to remind ourselves where we were and how far we've come. And I'm incredibly proud of particularly the response of that Paycheck Protection Program. When again, going back, Adam, I had mentioned that the unemployment went up to 16%, but that means 84% of the people kept working and kept getting a paycheck. And now we're back down to 2.6% unemployment. And our economy is stronger than it's been since the Reagan administration. So if we can solve these issues of broadband, getting everybody access, and childcare, getting everybody access, I think we're going to be in a very good place. Okay, back to you, Tim, to respond.
Sure, thanks. So hi, Adam. Before I talk about broadband, let me just reemphasize something that was said earlier about the flexibility and use of these funds and the streamlined nature of getting the funds to us. So, in 2020, we did not know what was going to be coming in for real estate taxes. We didn't know what impact COVID was going to have. So we had to be very conservative in our budget. And one of the things we did was to drop our summer programs, primarily our local pool, which is very popular with parents and kids. We were subsequently able to get the pool open and use it in the summer of 2021 by accessing ARPA funds for that. So we had over $100,000 that were used to pay lifeguards and to pay more lifeguards, because obviously with the communicability of the disease, we need to restructure the way we were doing things at the pool. So those funds helped keep a very important community resource open for the summer. And it had as much to do with mental health as it did with recreation. Yeah. People needed to be able to get out and do that. So back to broadband for a minute. So as I mentioned, Lebanon was in a fairly fortunate position going in that somewhere between 96 and 97% of our population was served by high-speed broadband, but it really became an equity issue. So we wanted our rural residents to be treated the same way as our in-town residents with respect to access to that broadband, not just for remote learning, which was very critical, but for telehealth and home work, that sort of thing. So it was extremely important to us. And the ARPA funds really allowed us to engage with Comcast and leverage some of those funds we were receiving to get to these 142 homes. So I think it's extremely important. I think it's an equity issue, and I'm very, very happy I will be very happy to have 100% of our homes hooked up.
Great. Annie Lenz, back to you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'm not seeing anybody else with a question. Again, if folks want to ask something, just to raise your hand in that section. We'll give you another second or two. Otherwise, we should be all set.
We're good.
Oh,
Well,
all right. We do actually have one more question from
Okay.
Mara, who is with NHPR. So Mara, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Mara, if you want to unmute yourself, we'll hear you.
Mara, I don't know if your audio is working. If you want to
You could
type your
type it into
question,
the
yeah.
chat if you'd like. I'll just say while we're waiting, I should have mentioned this before, but I want to thank Mayor McNamara because I was back starting in March of 2020 and from time to time throughout touching base with our mayors and our city officials across my district. And Tim, you were very helpful, giving me a sense of what's happening on the ground. What do you need? How we can, and that's how we shaped the funding, was to know that, it was going to literally cover every aspect of it, including, I love your example of the pool, because you're right, it was a mental health issue. Families needed to get out and have fun, and the kids needed to get out, and people were really, cabin fever became a very real thing. So
I was going to just.
there we go. Oh, go ahead.
There it is.
Good. No, go ahead, Sarah, while I read it.
Well, I was just going to jump in on the point you made, Congresswoman, about childcare being an issue for everyone. It's something I wanted to say earlier, and that is that I think even if you don't have young children that you're trying to find childcare for, I think the ways we all see it playing out in terms of hospitals not being able to hire the nurses and physicians they need because they can't get coverage, especially in the evening and nighttime shifts. Stores cutting back on their hours, and restaurants that are saying, well, you come in and you serve yourself, or it's only takeout.
Or they're only open a few nights a week. We have
Right.
lots of restaurants around the state that are limited in the number of days that they're open because they can't find a workforce. And
Right.
that is frequently related to childcare.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think it's just important, and it's one of the things I've been wanting to highlight as we've taken this on, is that it really truly is an issue that impacts all of us. And, from healthcare to leisure to our ability to work and our ability to employ people in our places of work. So I really appreciate your spotlighting it, and I'm thankful for our supporters as we take this on, including the City of Lebanon.
Yeah, and there's an analogy too with the broadband to make sure everyone has access. Everyone can get the job training and the education and be available to work online. I think that's really important. All right, so Mara's asking, I'm wondering if Lebanon's broadband project is related to the Grafton County Broadband Committee's work. Anybody, Tim, do you know?
So the answer is not directly, but I'll let Sean expound on that.
So we support the Grafton County project, and we have signaled that to them, and we are working with them. However, that project focuses mostly on the backbone and the last mile projects, and those, especially rural communities that almost have no coverage at all. And our situation is a little bit different because most of our community is covered. So we have just taken a slightly different approach. Again, we support and work with them on their project, but our situation is slightly different because we only have small clusters here and there on the extremes of our community that don't have coverage. So it's a different project.
I think it's a great goal, though, for you to set 100%. You know, I would imagine that knowing Grafton County as I do, the heart of my district, there's a lot of really rural communities, very, very small communities. And those are the ones that we've been working with in our rural broadband task force, and we can reach out to the Grafton County project about sources of funding to help them move forward. Because you get to the point, you know, up until now, we've been relying on the private sector, on companies like Comcast to step up and do this right. But if you think back, I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee, but also on the Agriculture Committee. And if you think back to the Rural Electrification Act, where Congress passed legislation to make sure that rural communities and farm households will have access to electricity. This is way back, I think, in the 1930s, probably. And we need to consider a similar approach in rural broadband, where there is sufficient incentives and funding and resources to convince private sector companies to come in and take this on. Because, you know, I have towns in my district that have got 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 people. You're hard pressed to convince a company to come in and take that on, particularly, as you mentioned, that last mile and those long driveways. It just is not the most lucrative market. So, and I think there's some new technologies that are coming along that are going to help with that. But it's certainly my goal that every household in the state would have access to broadband communication. It's just so important. I mean, we haven't even mentioned telehealth, but the breakthroughs in telehealth during COVID are extraordinary, and the access that people could have. And that's going to make a big difference in terms of mental health. I've mentioned that a couple of times, but I'm very, very focused on mental health, addiction treatment, access as we move forward, because many people, this was a real struggle, and it's going to be a challenge getting folks back on track. Well, it's great to be with you. I feel like Lebanon is this model community. Wait, one more question for Mara, if we have time. Yes, we have time.
End of the year.
What's the timeline for broadband connection? We're talking December of 2022.
Yep.
So that's great news. Well, thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay warm. And thank you, Annie Lentz is modeling our mask behavior. We have limited access back in our office down in DC, and we're big mask proponents. So everybody, please stay safe, be well, and I thank you for your time today. Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.